Hi. It's been a minute. So I moved a few states. I'm in North Carolina now, as you might be able to tell from the lovely backdrop, blue sky, some nice trees. I'm actually on a golf course right now. I'm not golfing, but you'll probably, throughout this recording, see at least a few people walking past in the background. And yeah, I know that I'm several months behind on these reviews, and I thought to myself I should probably do something about that. So without further ado, I got rotation 16. Got my notes. Starting off, I got Inside Every Fig is a Dead Wasp by Lunar Vacation. This one comes from Evan. Now, I didn't mind this so much, like, you know my taste in music. I'm looking for something kind of bombastic or extremely emotional. And, this was, I think, a really good example of just some saccharine indie pop kind of thing. It was a really sweet listen, but it didn't really strike a chord with me too much. There was nothing revolutionary going on, but what it set out to do, I thought that the band did well, and it was a really easy, pleasant listen. Going into these reviews, obviously I'm months behind, so I, did my best to keep track in my head of what I thought of the album, but to refresh myself, I picked out a few songs and just gave it another listen so I could make sure I'm giving this, I'm going about this with a fresh mind, right? And, going back and revisiting the vibe of it, pleasant really was the word I would use to describe it. Nothing crazy, super energetic, just nice listening, relax, easy listening, doesn't require a lot of, investment. And there's nothing wrong with that. That just, it's not, what I typically appreciate in music. So Inside Every Fig is a Dead Wasp. That's going to get a 6 out of 10 from me. Next up, we got the English Riviera by Metronomy. This one's from Dom. And this one I thought was more interesting. I feel like it shares some of my critiques from Inside Every Fig in that it didn't have a ton of bombast. It wasn't like a super ambient album. I'm one end of the spectrum or another. I don't really strive for, I don't really seek out those middle bits. But the things that this album had were interesting to me. I thought it was groovy. I thought the hooks in the songs were really nice. I really liked the juxtaposition between the male and female vocalists. I thought that their what's the word? Their voices, that's the word. I thought their voices complemented each other really nicely. And so with all that, I thought it was a nice and coherent project. I don't even really know what genre I would put this in, because on the one hand, it had some Britpop influences, but I wouldn't call it Britpop. It definitely doesn't fit into the same vein as like Oasis or Blur. But, I also heard some influences there that might have been like Gorillaz, Radiohead, even a little bit of Porcupine Tree. And so it was a very British album, but I don't know exactly what kind of album it is or even what kind of album it was trying to be. The fact that threw me for a loop and really kept me, I guess, from having a preconceived notion. It pushed away my biases. I thought that it was a nice listen. It was interesting enough, didn't push too many boundaries, but I'm glad I got to check it out. I'm glad I listened to it. So I think the English Riviera, it never got stale, kept me on my toes. I didn't really fall into a trance or a pattern with it, and I'm thinking I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I think that's reasonable. Next up, we got The Kid by Caitlin Aurelia Smith. This one's from Brendan. And this was unlike anything I'd ever listened to. It was ethereal and dreamlike. Obviously, I don't know how you could listen to that and not have those words pop in your head. Just such a surreal listen, really. And just on the quality alone, that it's going to be unlike something I've heard before, I'm appreciative of it. I don't know that it was my favorite, but the uniqueness of it and the interesting factor definitely makes it a memorable listen. I liked how conceptual it was. I unfortunately didn't pay a ton of attention to the lyrics. They kind of drowned into the blurriness of the whole project. But from the song titles, I noticed that there was a concept. The album is called A Kid, and it's like the song titles are like, I am a kid, an intention, a thought, and I want to one thing, another thing. And that I thought was an interesting idea to go with, and probably framed a lot of the vibes on the individual tracks. Now, beyond that, I thought the instrumentation was odd. It's not a knock. I appreciated that. It's a good thing. So I don't really know how she achieved some of the sounds she achieved, but I liked the way she made them. I like how she put them together. And her vocal style, at times it had an odd cadence, but it was never off-putting. In fact, I think that I'd say atypicality of it was really nice. I thought it added to the whole experience, and I'll reiterate, not my favorite sound in the world, but unique and interesting enough for me to want to give it a 7.5 out of 10. All right, we got Everything All the Time by Band of Horses. This one's from Nick. And, this was kind of generic, I thought. Very, very strong early 2010s vibe. That stompy rock, that kind of Mumford & Sons adjacent sound. I'm not going to go so far as to compare it to Imagine Dragons, because I think that's a pretty significant insult if I were to do that. But nothing about it really stood out. It sounded like stuff I'd heard on the radio a million times in middle school and high school. I took the bus, and they're going to have the top 40 radio on it. And so, it just didn't stick with me. There were a couple tracks that I enjoyed. Not The Funeral. I know that's the standout track from this album, but I liked Great Salt Lake. I thought that was a better song. But yeah, just really stale sound. Didn't do anything particularly offensive, but didn't do anything. No points in its favor. No points against it. No points in its favor. 5 out of 10, I think. Call it there and move on. All right, now we got the Garden series by Post Animal from Xavier, and I loved this so much. So you may not be familiar with this band, but there's a band, Mink Muscle Creek. It's, I guess, not a band so much. It's a side project of, I think his name's Kevin Parker. He's Tame Impala, right? He did one album as a side project under the name Mink Muscle Creek, and it has that same Tame Impala sound to it, where it's, very saturated, very drippy, juicy, but it was more rock than, his more pop-oriented stuff with Tame Impala. And this 100% scratched that itch. I've always been a little sad that there was only ever one Mink Muscle Creek project, but this is exactly what I was looking for. I don't know if it's a bonus point, but apparently Steve from Stranger Things, I think that's his name, the guy with the hair from Stranger Things, this was his band. So it's kind of a shame that he got famous, because now that I don't think they're going to be making nearly as much music. Regardless of that, I really enjoyed this. I thought, even as, I shouldn't even say even as an EP, this was extremely tight, very well polished, very well put together, and I just loved the sound. It sounded like Tame Impala with some Giz elements in it. And if you didn't tell me beforehand, I would have 100% assumed that this was an Australian band. It just had such an Australian feeling to it. Even a little bit of the psychedelic porn crumpets in there. Just a lovely lovely listen. I think like 2 or 3 of the songs off this EP did get onto my everyday list, just because this is exactly the kind of everyday listening music that I like. I love King Gizzard. I love Tame Impala. I just love this Australian sound, and even though these guys are American, they nailed it. So, the Garden series, really, really, really up my alley. So I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. It was a lovely time. Next up, we have Boston by Boston from Connor. And this is probably going to be a really short segment because, like, what can I say? It's like one of the defining classic rock albums. It's great. And if anything, if I have any, like, unique thing to say about it, I think it suffers from what I've referred to as Great Gatsby syndrome, where it sounds cliched, it sounds overdone and, repetitive and stale, but that's because it kind of invented those concepts, or at least it's a very well-known example of doing those things back in the day. But, like, there's so many, just raw bangers. More Than a Feeling, obviously. Long Time. Just, yeah. It's Boston. Everyone knows that if you're talking about classic rock albums, especially if you're talking about, like, I don't want to call it one-hit wonders, but, like, Boston popped off with this, and I don't know, did they pop off after it? As far as I'm aware, they released this, rose to meteoric heights, and probably released more stuff that's just as good, but everyone just knows them for this. So, it's dictionary definition, classic rock, well-made, well-performed, iconic. It's not my favorite classic rock, but it's Boston. It's a good album. I would be insane if I said this wasn't a good album, so it's an 8 out of 10. Simple as. Next up, we got Joy as an Act of Resistance by Idols. This one comes from me, so I just get to spend the next couple of minutes explaining why I love this album, which I'm not going to complain about. I'm making these reviews. You don't got to tell me what to do. So, Idols, post-punk group out of the UK. I love their vocalist. I think he is extremely cheeky. I love his lyricism. I think it's poignant and fun. And his delivery, too. He, obviously, you can tell by listening, he doesn't have a very traditional singing voice, but I think that really adds to the overall vibe of the songs. This album has so many great bangers and so many funny moments. And beyond that, if you're looking into, like, what the songs are actually about, I personally just really agree with the messaging of the album. Be loving, be respectful, help each other, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason I put this on here as opposed to other Idols albums is I think this just kind of summarizes what they do best. I hate to say it, but their last album, Tank, I wasn't the biggest fan of, and I acknowledge and I'm happy that the vocalist, Joe Talbot, is sober, but they're missing this energy. The energy you get off Joy as an Act of Resistance, you just aren't getting on their newer stuff. And there's just so much fun in this album. I don't want to call it all singles, but, like, I don't think there's a track off this album that I would just be like, I'm not in the mood to listen to that, It's coherent, not in the way that, like, a concept album is, but just every song brings that fun. It brings that vibe, that energy. And there's just so many, like, quotable moments from it. Never Fight a Man with a Perm, obviously. Colossus, incredible. I'm Scum. Almost every song, I shouldn't say that. Half of the songs have a lyric that just lives rent-free in my head. So, for that reason, I love this album. The energy never stops. The fun never stops. And I really hope you guys enjoyed it too. So, Joy as an Act of Resistance. It's a tough one. Joy as an Act of Resistance That's going to get a 9.5 out of 10 from me. I really like that album. Moving on. We got Food by MF Doom. This one's from Hunter. Audio peaked for a second there. Gotta be careful about that. I'm holding the microphone today, so I'm still getting used to how far away from my face I should hold it. Food. Hot take, this is not my favorite MF Doom album. I really like Born Like This. I think that's the title of the album. It has cells on it. It's Doom, so I like it. You know, MF Doom is great in terms of, like, I don't want to say mainstream rappers. Doom is one of my favorites. His flow continues to be unique. His lyricism continues to be out of this world, and the beats continue to be unique, fun, and interesting. It's an enrapturing experience through and through, and the food motif throughout, it was a really fun time. I thought that was a nice touch. It elevated the album, and it, you know, kept it from getting too stale or too generic. But it's not my favorite Doom project. You know, it's not bad though. You know, some of the songs I like. You know, obviously Rap Snitch Knishes is a classic track. You can't go wrong with that one. But I've heard better. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means I'm allowed to have my opinions and my preferences, and I really hope that my head is still in frame. Otherwise, I'll have to redo this whole video. So, Food, MF Doom, to 7 out of 10. Alright, next up, we got MTV Unplugged Live in New York by Nirvana. This one's from Kyle. And I hadn't listened to this, which is a bit of a sin. But I, you know, now in retrospect can understand why it's a sin. I've always been a bit of a hater when it comes to live recordings. A lot of the time I just feel like the audience detracts from the music, and the, you know, the recording quality is obviously not going to be as good as something made in the studio. Now, that being said, MTV Unplugged Live in New York, I think, was a major exception to that. The interactions between Cobain and the rest of the band and the audience, especially with, you know, the historical context of this performance, really elevated it. The acoustic set and the covers, especially Man Who Sold the World, like, I thought it was done brilliantly, you know? It said, I'm still not a huge live recording fan, but as far as live albums go, this is definitely one of the best ones that I've seen, or not seen. One of the best ones I've heard. So, all in all, I think that I would give MTV Unplugged Live in New York, that's going to be a 7 out of 10. You know, I don't know if it were in the studio. That's the hard thing, right? If it was a studio recording, then I don't think I would have given it a higher score. I do think that it being live really did elevate it in this case. But, you know, maybe it was just the track selection that I wasn't a huge fan of. I'm already, like, you know, I like Nirvana, but I'm not, like, the biggest Nirvana fan on earth. So I think 7 out of 10, you know, you can yell at me, but I think 7 out of 10 is fair, at least for me. All right, lastly, we got A Grand Don't Come for Free by The Streets from Chai. This one, I actually have a decent amount to say, because I was a bit thrown off kilter at first. Off kilter, I think, is a good way to describe at least the first half of this album for me. The delivery of the lyrics was very unconventional, very idiosyncratic, if you will. Just that cadence felt off, the delivery felt jilted, stilted. That's the word I'm looking for. It just felt wrong. I don't know. I haven't really studied music theory, but it feels like it definitely violated a rule of music theory. But as the album went on, at first I don't think that it was apparent to me that this was a concept album. it took me a while to realize, oh, he's telling a full narrative. These are not disparate songs. This is a full-fledged novel that I'm being recited. And with that in mind, that's when the delivery really started to click in my head. Chai, you're a bastard because Fit and You Know It is an earworm and is not even that good of an earworm. It's just extremely irritating. But in the context of the whole album, it really does elevate it. And I think what really sealed the deal on how I feel, oh, that was nice rhyming there. What really solidified my feelings on it were the last two tracks, Dry Your Eyes and I think Empty Bottles. Is that what it's called? Empty Cans. Yeah, Empty Cans. The ending of it, of him realizing, oh, I've been problematic, I've been an asshole, and this is what I get. And then at the very end, the start of Empty Cans being like, okay, I've been hurt and I'm going to take that out on the people around me. And then immediately, or not even immediately, but letting that simmer, letting you kind of feel that hopelessness, and then resetting the song, and quite literally resetting that track and being like, oh, okay, no, this is how we process emotions and pain in a healthy manner. And going through the rest of the track, expanding on that, expanding on healing and growing and acknowledging and accepting. I thought that was just a gorgeous way to wrap things up. Overall, I think on repeat listens, this is definitely something that will grow more and more with me. But for now, I feel comfortable giving it an 8 out of 10. So now that I've figured out my recording setup, I really hope that it won't take me as long to get the next few reviews out. So until then, I'll see you guys.